Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe, here with me is my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
And we're continuing our reading of The Elephant Tower. Last chapter of the story of The Elephant Tower is honestly one of the most sorrowful in the entirety of Howard's career. This chapter is gut-wrenching and heartbreaking as we're introduced to, well, first an ivory door. Ivory being symbolic of opulence, virtue, and chastity, which we can see here a statement just on what lies past this door. The Elephant Man from Yag has been chased, very obviously, but he has maintained a certain amount of his virtue and purity since the fall of his homeworld and his arrival on Earth. But the trouble is, the opulence, I would argue, is entirely Yara's. And so this is an opulent place, but a place of sorrow, and yes, also chastity and virtue, but it's also a prison in a way. At first, Conan doesn't realize the Elephant Man is alive, but once he does, he feels a certain sense of horror, only to then feel a swell of pity as the Elephant Man has been forcibly blinded. As said, he comes from the planet of Yag, as mentioned on page 96. The elephant mentions Volusia, Camellia, and Comoria, all nations from the Thurian age, and how he witnessed the swallowing of Atlantis and Lemuria by the oceans, and that he saw the dawn of the Hyborian age. That said, I love that there's a reference to Volusia and Camellia and Comoria, all nations of the Thurian age. As much as he was revered as a god by the people of Kitai until the arrival of Yara, this was but a prelude to what was to come for him. His life would be one of torment, torture, and suffering at the hands of his former apprentice. He did end up teaching a lot of his magical arts to Yara, who enslaved him using other fouler arts and forced him to build the Elephant Tower. And then 300 years later, we have the present day, that is to say the Hyborian age. The Elephant Man lost many secrets to Yara, but not all. He's preserved his
Part of the elephant.
He reveals that his name is Yoga of Yag, and Yoga wishes to die and pour his blood upon. We have to pause here and just make reference to how sorrowful and haunting this chapter is. This is honestly one of the best written chapters in all of Howard's career, as he conveys a wealth of sorrow and pain and melancholy. Seriously, I think the only author who manages to convey this level of sorrow is Tolkien himself. Yoga of Yag is really a victim of the foulest parts of human nature, so that Yara really deserves what happens to him, being shrunken and then crushed. One could probably attach, almost as a metaphor, the sorrow and pity that Conan feels here as essentially the crossing of childhood into manhood. What I mean is, Conan pities Yoga. If we look at Yoga's pain and the wealth of emotions Conan feels, you can kind of look at that as a metaphor for growing up. That Conan is aging from boy to man because the last strips of his innocence is being torn away. That's one way of reading this text, as he looks at just the worst kind of cruelty man could ever demonstrate to another. That's what this story, to an extent, is all about. As to the archetype, Conan is mostly depicted as the warrior here, but I would argue he's essentially he's the prince to an extent, in a way, because we got to bear in mind Conan is the king archetype. That aside, Conan here, mercy killing Yoga, is a reference to that first Kull story, Exile of Atlantis, when Kull kills that one woman out of pity to spare her the flames that the Atlanteans in their madness would subject her to. So there's a lot of references here, and there's a lot to think about. Elephants, for their part, are symbols of luck and prosperity, but they are also representative of wisdom, long life, memory, and vitality. The vitality here is that of the Elephant Tower. Once the elephant dies, there is no more vitality. And he was a bringer of wisdom. In the classical sense, wisdom was representative of knowledge. With Yoga's death, there's a great wealth of knowledge that will die with him. As to longevity and prosperity, there was that. Yara did claim that, but it's going to be gone soon. Because thanks to Yoga, he managed to extend his own life for 300 years. Unnaturally, so I would argue. That said, this is the death of wisdom. But in a way, the wisdom of a mature man is being transferred to Conan here. So there is a metaphor here for the wisdom of adulthood being transferred. But it's also, if you don't read it that way and you prefer to just look at it as, vitality, longevity, prosperity, luck, and whatnot, most of that is being transferred to Conan. The wisdom, the longevity, the prosperity, the good luck. But on the other hand, this society, that of this Elephant Tower city, it will fall apart. with the death of Yoga. With his death, this city will fall. And maybe it's for the best, because this city has become one of vice and corruption. It essentially was at the start of its founding.
Yoga may have taught all the magical arts to his apprentice, but I find that his best student was Conan, because Conan listened to him and, as you mentioned, took the lessons of wisdom
To heart.
and
Yeah.
he starts to question things.
Yes, which is an important quality. It's after this story that Conan becomes hungry for knowledge, which is essentially the king archetype in his Odin aspect, the seeker of wisdom and knowledge. Now, wisdom means knowledge in the old Nordic context, but in the more modern context, it means thinking with your heart and your mind in perfect unison, perfectly balanced, so that you can see through people and problems. It is a key aspect of the king archetype, so that in the modern context, he thinks with heart and mind and with the years of experience behind him. But in the medieval or Nordic sense, it means knowledge of hidden learning and knowledges and ideas of the world, such as runes, alphabets, and being generally a bringer of civilization and prosperity to everywhere he goes. So Conan kind of becomes the next Elephant Man in a way. Yeah, Conan is the best student. Yoga may have taught Yara to think with his mind, but Yara never learned to think with his heart. Conan does. Ultimately tells Conan, once you have given over my gem and used its magic against Yara, run away. Get out of this tower. And at the end of the story, the tower falls and collapses onto the city, destroying a great deal of it. There's sorrow unending for a great many in this story. And Conan goes on from this story with a great deal more wisdom and intelligence, but also a great deal more sorrow. After this, he's prone to thinking more deeply about problems. And he is not simply a dumb brute, as many have tried to tell us in recent days. He is a character who thinks more deeply. He ponders more than a lot of other characters in literature.
Look at the discussion he had with Bêlit in Queen of the Black Coast.
She did not nearly give that discussion as much thought as him. Conan is strong silent type. Every word is measured, and every word has value and meaning. In a way, ironically, if you wanted to choose the perfect voice actor, I would argue Christopher Lee or James Earl Jones would be perfect, as they have a tendency of weighing every word and saying it as though it were the most important thing they'll ever say in their lives. I know Christopher Lee's passed, but that said, Conan, from here on out, there's going to be a slightly darker edge and heavier edge to his character. He carries things a lot more on his shoulders. Yes, he'll a few times behave cruelly to some characters, but he also behaves with more heroism afterwards. Conan is a rogue and a raider and a thief, but he's also a hero at his core. He was once claimed to be, I forget by which,
Most popular fantasy character of all times, and I think this is for a good reason.
but he's definitely in the top 5.
Best characters in fantasy literature of all times.
And this story shows it, and this chapter shows it. So how about we rate this story?
I'll say a 4. I really love coming of age stories, and
They don't get better than this.
I want to see more of young Conan after this.
You're not going to really too much.
And that's the sad part, because if a story leaves you yearning for more, then it did a good thing. You have to have the wisdom to understand a story must come to an end.
Yep, Conan's childhood is at an end. Most of the other stories are him in his 20s or in his 30s or 40s, him having already reached maturity. I'm going to rate it the same, and I'm going to accuse you of stealing my rating.
And I'm going to accuse you of merely copying me.
It's just this story is so well written and so good. I don't know how Howard accomplishes it in 20 pages? No, I think it's 15 pages long. This is a really, really short story. It's super short. It's, I think, the shortest Conan story, but it's one of the most beautiful. Tell us what you think. How would you rate it? And don't forget to, if you enjoyed this video, smash that like and that subscribe button as though you were Conan, smashing apart the enemies of Yoga of Yag.